rend the heavens and come down like you did in the days of old when God would do things and they were surprised by it. And then in verse 7, Isaiah says, "You have hidden your face from us." And then the chapter ends with Isaiah with an acknowledgement of who God is and who they are in relation with him. I wanted to read verses 10 through 12 with you. "Your holy cities have become a wilderness. Zion has become a wilderness. Jerusalem a desolation. Our holy and beautiful house, where our fathers praised you, has been burned by fire, and all our pleasant places have become ruins. Will you restrain yourself at these things, O Lord? Will you keep silent and afflict us so terribly?" Isaiah acknowledges that the places that were devoted to God were in ruins. And Isaiah wants to know, how long are you going to wait while your people are afflicted? What lessons do you all see here?
I'd like to draw attention to verses 1 through 3, where we read, "Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, that the mountains might quake at your presence, as when the fire kindles brushwood and the fire causes water to boil, to make your name known to your adversaries, that the nations might tremble at your presence. When you did awesome things that we did not look for, you came down and the mountains quaked at your presence." Seems there he's saying, we wish we could see what we've heard you did in the past. But because we're not seeing that, in verse 6, we have all become like one who is unclean. It's almost like he's saying, if you had done more, God, and we'd seen your presence, then we wouldn't have sinned. I think all of us probably think it'd be neat to see the parting of the Red Sea, or the fire of God coming down on Mount Sinai. And we might think, if I saw that, I'd be faithful. I would not waver. But the reality is the people who saw that, they did waver, and they weren't faithful. Seeing what God can do and his incredible actions would be incredible to see, but they're not a guarantee of faithfulness. So what's the answer then? Well, the answer is just be faithful. Trust in God. That's been the failure of mankind at all times, whether we see God work or not. Our call is just to trust in the Lord and do what God has told us to do. As we read these things that we know he's capable of, we know he can still do them. But he doesn't do them today in our lives. He still works. He's still active, but he doesn't do those things. We don't have to see those things, though. We just need to trust him and obey him.
Well, I want to look at the question at the end of verse 5. Isaiah, on behalf of the audience, asked the question, shall we be saved? And really what prompted that question is really a reflection upon their sins. He says in verse 5, "Behold, you were angry for we sinned, and we continued in them a long time." And then he asks the question, shall we be saved? I think a lot of us ask ourselves that question, will God save us? We look at our own sinfulness and how often we've sinned against God and how often we continue to sin against God and ask the question, shall we be saved? I think Isaiah points to some ideas here. It says these are the ones that God saves despite their sin. He talks about really in verse 5, those who rejoice in doing righteousness. Not that they merely do righteousness, they're completely righteous, but they rejoice in doing the will of the Lord. He talks about in verse 6, those who recognize, who mourn over their sin and their indebtedness to God. And finally in verse 8, those who turn to the Lord and say, you are our master, we give ourselves to you, allow God to shape our lives. I think those are the ones who God will save despite the rebellions against him in the past.
Well, 2 great applications today. We hope these help you in your walk with God. Please join us again on Tuesday morning when we get into Isaiah chapter 65. We hope you all have a great day. Thanks.